were anti-Klan, which is why they grabbed it in the first place, they made a stink about it, and they ultimately had the head of the Ku Klux Klan arrested and some of his henchmen. And the knowledge of this, the exposure of it, and then the criminal trial destroyed the Klan as an organization in the 1920s. And they went out of existence once again. Well, as you will gather from me talking about this, the Klan has come back over and over and over again. In the 1950s, when Dr. Martin Luther King came along and the Civil Rights Movement started its push towards equal rights, the Klan came back into existence as an underground organization that was putting bombs in churches and blowing up the houses of black activists, civil rights activists. They were terrorizing, they were trying once again to terrorize the black population and defeat the civil rights movement that was on the scene, which was a mass movement of black people and their allies. And of course, even their reign of terror was not able to stop the movement that had started in the mid-1950s. The Montgomery bus boycott and other protests around the South ultimately overthrew the old South. It overthrew the system of segregation. And of course, with the Klan, they were disbanded and many of them were put in prison. Some of them are still being rounded up to this day. Well, one truth that you need to know is that there was a lot of protection for the Klan, even at the highest levels of the federal government. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI and who later destroyed the Black Panther Party, he was someone who thought that the Klan was a great organization, a great patriotic and organization. He supported white supremacy, and he didn't want to go after these Klansmen, but he was forced to by the continued presence of organizers, young people especially, because the backbone of the civil rights movement was not Dr. Martin Luther King and the older activists. It was in fact the student and youth organizers. Just for placing this within a historical context, the civil rights movement from 55 to 65, and then Black Power from 65 to 75, right? We put this within context. Well, there were two wings of the civil rights movement. In 1960, another wing, a student and youth wing, came into existence. And the student and youth wing was much more militant and much more willing to take on the Klan or anyone else, and they had a mass protest campaign in 1964 that challenged the whole South, and especially in Mississippi, which was the die-hard racist state of that period. I mean, there were more people killed in Mississippi, more people kidnapped or what they call disappeared in Mississippi because of the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations. And so if you were an organizer in that period, civil rights organizer, as many of these young people were, it was with the knowledge that you could be killed. I mean, I'm not saying you could be beat up. I mean, that could happen too, but the prospect was better for you to be killed. You could be burned alive, you could be cut to pieces, you could be hung. Anything could happen to you. Anything could happen to you. And many deaths as a result happened. But it wasn't just that you were an activist and could be killed. You could be killed if you were just black, and the white racists there felt that you were uppity, or they didn't like what you looked like or what you said that day or whatever. It was just a time when you could be murdered and you would get no justice in the court system. There was no prospect of it whatsoever. It was a racist reign of terror. And even with that, as I said, they weren't able to stop the movement. They were not able to defeat the movement. But they were also, again, sold out by the federal government. And as a result of this, a sharp contradiction arose inside the movement between those who wanted to maintain the middle class concepts of nonviolence, and those who had been influenced by Malcolm X with some discussions he had with the leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1964 in Ghana, and continuing in Selma, Alabama. And these discussions radicalized the thinking of the student leaders. And it radicalized it so much that they went quickly from the whole idea of just accepting the ability to go in and eat at a lunch counter, you know, public accommodation, in other words, equal, you can go in and eat or whatever, accepting that, to demanding freedom and ultimately black liberation. And this came about in 1965 from SNCC, the same organization, the concept of black power. And this came about when two activists, primarily two activists we're talking about, Willie Ricks, who has been called the best organizer, bar none, in the civil rights period. Organizer, I said leader, organizer in the civil rights period. And as he was known then, Stokely Carmichael, as he was known then. Of course, he was Kwame Ture up until he died. What these brothers did, one, by going into communities and talking to black people and getting a feel for what black people were thinking at that time in Mississippi, Alabama, all these other rural areas. And the South was really a rural area back in those days. And even in this period, you know, if you were talking about the state of Tennessee, you'd have to say that it was come on in and have a seat, brother. It was a rural area. It's a rural area even to this period. And it's a backward area, you know, even in this period. But it's not the same. It's not totally the same as it was then. So he was able to go and talk to people and find out what they were thinking, and to find out that they were not willing to just settle for paltry reforms. They wanted a whole ball of wax. They wanted to be free, and they would not stop at anything to be free. And realizing this, he was able to then go and tell Stokely Carmichael this, as he was known then, and he was able to say, you know, incorporated in one of his speeches. And it had never been said before in any speech or anything. He got up and he said, I'm sick and tired of being arrested by these racist crackers here, these rednecks. And the rednecks are these racist white people that terrorize the South, pro-Klan and all this. He said, I'm sick and tired of this, these Klansmen posing as law enforcement officers. I'm sick of it. I'm not going again. He said, and he said, what we need here, we don't need any more damn reforms. We need black power. And as soon as he said that, the whole crowd jumped up. Black power! Black power! Started screaming black power. And of course, the older leaders that were part of this protest, Dr. King and others, were all there. And they were shocked and frightened, actually. They didn't know what the hell was going on. And there had been ideological differences between these elements of the black civil rights movement. That of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee on the one hand, and Dr. King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and other groups in between. And black power opened a door. It opened a door to a level of consciousness, but it also opened a door to a level of protest in the cities, especially in urban areas, because it spread everywhere. It left Mississippi and it went to Harlem and went to Chicago, went everywhere. And ultimately even left the shores of the United States and came to the UK and went in. Even the struggles in Africa, the anti-colonial struggles in Africa against European imperialism, it even infected those movements, or informed those movements, whichever you want to call it. And what I'm attempting to do here is to show you how this movement developed from an idea, a small protest movement. And in the case of the student wing of the civil rights movement, that small protest movement started with 4 men, 4 students, And all they did was go into a lunch counter and sit down and demand to be served food. And of course, if you look at this now, you know, all the stuff that's happening in the world today and everything, all the acts of, you know, revolutionary violence and resistance, oh, that was nothing. Well, look at it this way. They could kill you in front of everybody. They could kill you. They could beat you to death. And they did things like that back in those days. They did things where people were just murdered on the streets, black people, whatever they wanted to kill them for. And for these young men to go in there and then demand to be served was an act of utter defiance against racism. Utter defiance. And so the act that they did that day excited other students. And other students came with them. And day after day after day, this thing started getting bigger. And ultimately, it got so big that it spread all over the South. Other cities were doing the same thing. And it was successful in North Carolina the first time they did it, these four young men. And when something's successful, people have a tendency to emulate it. And so that's what you know, sparked this off. Now, Snake lasted 9 years. And after it went to the stage of black power, and after, you know, the youth picked it up, the students and youth picked it up, and all over the country, when the cops would do something to black people, as they always do, even to this day, brutalize black people, kill them, whatever, they didn't have a Klan there, but they had cops. And cops performed the same function as a Klan. So when they would murder black folks or beat them or whatever, black people would rise up in rebellion. And there were, I think in the late 60s, there were something like 700 rebellions, 220 people were killed, you know, and these were anti-government protests, essentially. That's what they were. Nobody didn't call them that, but that's what the hell they were. Anti-government protests. So they rose up in rebellion. They started burning the cities down, if that's what it took to get the attention of the state. And this was a fundamental challenge to white supremacy and a fundamental challenge to the white supremacist state that maintained it. Because let's be clear about one thing. We're not just talking about white people's sentiment or what's in their head. We're talking about a system of oppression. Like Malcolm X called capitalism a blood-sucking regime that could not survive without sucking somebody's blood in Africa or some country or whatever, some class. So this is what we're talking about. Black people in America are the lowest form of class. You know, they're on the bottom right now with a so-called black president, a so-called black president. You have the highest level of unemployment, the highest level of poverty, the highest level of oppression, you know, police shootings, killings, and all of this, you know, black infant mortality, every form of oppression you can think of. Now, it isn't the same as it was in 1961. What do you accomplish if you're so critical? Well, listen, we utterly defeated and destroyed the system of segregation. That form of white supremacy is gone and has been for a long time. But racism linked to the capitalist system is still here, and the form has changed. Now we've got 2.3 million people in the prison system, and 1 million of those are black, young black people primarily, and then there are 700,000 Latinos or Hispanic peoples who are also on the bottom, and you've got massive numbers of people every year killed. You got 1,000 people killed every year. So you add that up. 1,000 people killed every year. How many people were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq? You add those things together. There's more people killed in the United States, more black people killed, than the United States government managed to kill in you know, Iraq. And there they know they're at war. You know, they know the government's there at war against them. In the United States, they still think they're free. Still think they're free. They think that a black president is coming to save them. riding in on a white horse.